For my design final, I decided to make a deer plush, so come along with me to make it. I started off with the torso. I did random shapes and sewed them together. And then I did the neck. I made a generic tube and then pinned it and sewed it on by hand. And then after I sewed that on, I went ahead and I moved to the bottom of the body, starting off with the legs, sewing them together and stuffing them. I even made tiny little bead bags to give the bottom of the feet weight, so then there would be some kind of stabilization and dangliness. I kind of liked the dangliness. I wanted it to feel not very stiff, a little playful. And so I'm pinning it on, getting it to a position that I like, tucking the edges, and then I'll hand sew it. Then I'm trying to come up with a bit of a different pattern for the back legs. I want them to be a little bit thicker, so that way they just kind of round out the shape of the deer on the back. Here I'm making more bead bags for the bottom of the feet. I got really excited making these, as you can see. I then start stuffing the legs with some stuffing, and then I'll put in the bead bags and then continue on putting in the stuffing, and then I'll pin them and sew them onto the body of the deer. Here are all the limbs pinned, and then I'll start sewing. On the next day, I started working on the head. I also had no plan for this. I just kind of started drawing some shapes that I thought made sense, tried to pin those together, realized they didn't work, and then I went ahead and did new shapes. So here is the second head that I tried to make, and I'm gonna sew the pieces together on the sewing machine. And then once I'm done, I'll stuff it, and then I'll attach it, I'll pin it to the body, and then start sewing it on. Then I went ahead and made some ears, just so I could kind of get a little more of an idea of what it would look like. Then I went ahead and worked on the eyes. I used little wooden balls, I drilled some holes in them, and then I tried to figure out how I would put them into the doll's head. So I made a little cone shape, and then I would sew the wooden balls onto that and then put them underneath the socket. So then I cut the holes into the actual deer head. I made a little template and then pinned it and cut them out. And then I went ahead and sewed and glued the wooden balls underneath the eye sockets. Here is the best part, is the long felting process that I went ahead and did. I did a technique called wet felting, which takes roving wool and you lay it on top of each other in different directions. You can add patterns on top of them and stuff, but you use warm soapy water on top, and then you can start rubbing them together. I was using bubble wrap and some mesh fabric, and then I would rub them together, and then here I'm just rolling it 800 times to even get it more tightly bound to each other. And yes, you heard that right, 800 times. So that was great. So once I had the felt, I was able to start pinning it onto the body. I would just kind of loosely pin it, and then I would just cut around the pinned areas, and then I would tuck the edges and then sew it onto the body that I already created with the muslin fabric. It was a very kind of trust the process, and I had a lot of fun with it. Here I'm using a ladder stitch to kind of hide away my thread as I'm stitching the felt onto the body. I definitely got to learn a lot of new techniques, not just like learning how to use an actual sewing machine, but even just hand stitching techniques that I wasn't confident using before, and now I feel a little better using them now. I also used a needle felting tool to kind of work on the ears or the tail, give them a little more dimension. Sewed those on. I embroidered the nose, and that was my finishing touch for the deer. I made this little tiny blanket for the deer using some yarn, and it turned out quite cute. You can see that it kind of looks like grass and flowers, which really drew me to it, and it really inspired this whole project, honestly. But without further ado, I think it's time for some glamour shots. I had a lot of fun making this, and I really hope you enjoyed watching the process. Bye bye!